a letter to a church in one of the most influential cities of the ancient world, from the most influential apostle ever known, a man who had never even met many of the believers to whom he wrote. This letter lays the foundation for their faith, for our faith, and explains how a people entrapped in sin and slavery can be reconciled to the perfect, just, and righteous God of the universe. This letter that became a biblical book that has shaped church history perhaps more than any other. This is Paul's letter to the Romans.
Well, good morning, NorthPoint. Good to see you this morning. And no walk-up music today. It's getting a little over the top. It's getting a little bit too much, especially for first service. So we're cutting that. Maybe that'll come back at some point in the future. But we are going to be in Romans today. So if you got a Bible, take it and turn to Romans chapter 1, if you would. Page 911. We've been there a little while. Okay, so page 911 in your chair Bibles. I'm going to tell you about a couple of things before we get into Romans today. First is that we had our annual meeting last Sunday. And during our annual meeting, we do this once a year, and we celebrate the previous year, and then we look forward to the upcoming year. And so it was a great time together to just look back a little bit and celebrate what God has done, just through growth, through baptisms and child dedications, and people coming to faith in Jesus, and the church growing and ministries growing, and us continue to reach into our community and bless a lot of people around us. And so it was fun to celebrate and thank God for those things. And then we look forward to this new year. We've been talking about the advance plan. And so I shared an update with the church on all of this praying and planning and thinking that God has been doing in the life of our church for, hey, where we sense God wants us to go in the future. And so I shared a plan with the church to try to address the space needs that we have to address the growth that we're seeing here, and also to pursue some new opportunities. And the big gist of the plan was this, is that we sense that God is leading us to turn this building into a community center. So to transform this place to be utilized 7 days a week for kids ministry and student ministry and groups and Bible studies and blood drives and refugee ministry and foster care and adoption and food insecurity in our community and all of these things, so that we as a church live out our Christianity in community. We're in relationships with people. We invite people in. We care for the needs that are in our community, and we see God just continue to use us and grow us and bring the gospel to our community through those ways. And so it was exciting to talk a little bit about that kind of in a big picture way. We've got a lot more to kind of unpack for you. We'll have some gatherings in the days ahead to talk more specifically about what that actually looks like. But I shared a couple of the new opportunities with the building and with our ministry we sense God's leading us into, and that looks like opening up and getting lots more gathering space for us on Sundays, but all throughout the week, an activity area, a cafe here, so you can maybe come and pick up lunch or pick up coffee and have a meeting with somebody. In addition to that, we need to expand our kids and our student spaces, including a child care center. And so all of these different pieces kind of coming together where, like I said, we're living out our Christianity in community. We're loving and caring for our community and for one another as well. And it's really just the next step in cultivating communities of grace and truth. So again, there's a lot more to it. More gatherings will be coming up to share more with you. But the most important thing really right now is that we continue to pray and we seek the Lord for his guidance and his direction. And so next Sunday begins our annual week of prayer. Now, we hope you're praying all throughout the year, but we have this dedicated week where we break the week up into 30-minute time slots. And so 24 times 7 is, does anybody know off the top of your head, you math people? It's like, I had to write it down. I don't remember off the top of my head either. 336, there it is. 336 slots to pray throughout the week. And so we ask you to just take this special opportunity this week, starting next Sunday, to really connect with God, to pray through the ministries of the church, pray through the leaders that are in the church as well. And we have some tools to help you do that. First, we want to ask you to sign up for some 30-minute prayer slots. So after the service today, there's a big screen in the central foyer right in the middle. There's iPads where you can sign up for some 30-minute prayer slots. I think you can still get some 3 a.m. slots. Some of those are still available for you. So if you like those would be great. But head out to the foyer after the service, sign up for some prayer slots. Now, some of you might be like, okay, 30 minutes of prayer, like all in a row. Like I think I could do 5 minutes, but like, how do I do 30 minutes? So we have a prayer guide for you to help guide you to grow and to learn how to pray, to also pray very specifically through ministries and to connect with God during that time. So that prayer guide will be available for you next week to guide you along. And then we have a special prayer and worship gathering on February the 14th. That's Ash Wednesday, February the 14th. Come spend Valentine's Day with Jesus and your fellow brothers and sisters seeking him together. And so we'll do that on February 14th. It was last year when we did this, it was one of the most meaningful times of worship I've ever had in my 10 years here at NorthPoint, was that time together to just sing to the Lord, pray with each other together. And so I'd encourage you to be a part of that time on Ash Wednesday, February 14th at 6:30. When I think about all of these things, how God's leading us as a church, we hope the future will be, and how God's guiding us, these opportunities to seek his face, it just made me think a lot about what Paul said in Romans 1, 14, 15, and 16, where he has this three things. He says, I am obligated to preach the gospel. I am so eager to share the gospel with people, and I am not ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ. It's like at the beginning of this letter, and it's where we're at as a church. It's like, let's go. Let's go. Let's rest in Jesus. Let's trust in him. Let's keep cultivating communities filled with the grace and the truth of Jesus Christ. And I hope there's some passion in you. I don't really see it on your faces so far this morning, but hopefully you feel it as well in your very Midwestern solemnness. So one other thing in Romans chapter 1 and verse 17 that I want us to see is this, and it sets us up for today. It's where Paul said in verse 17, in the gospel, the righteousness of God is revealed, a righteousness that is by faith from first to last. So this begs a question. First of all, we're like, great, a righteousness from God has been revealed. That is really good. I can receive the righteousness of God by faith. Wonderful. But here's the question, why do I want it? Like what? Why do you want the righteousness of God? Is it like if I come home from work and I say to my wife, honey, I got something for you. You're going to be so excited. This is so good for you. Guess what I brought you home? Corn nuts. Oh, wait, there they are. Corn nuts. I brought you corn nuts. And she's like, great. I'm really happy about that. That is just what I wanted. You're thinking about me. Is this righteousness of God thing, is it kind of like this? Like it's okay if you want it, or if you desire it. But if you don't, it's just sort of like, well, okay, I guess that's nice that God would give me that, but why would I even want that? Well, when you see what Paul actually says about it, you come to realize that the righteousness of God is, in verse 16, power. And it is salvation. And it leads to real life. So that sounds pretty good, like actual power and salvation and life from the one who made life. That's the positive reason why you want the righteousness of God. But there's actually another reason why you want the righteousness of God, and it's a negative reason. You get an inkling of it in verse 16 where it says, the gospel is the power of God for salvation. Salvation. Now, think about this. If I need salvation, if I need to be saved, what does that say about me? It says I'm in a desperate situation where I can't rescue myself and there is something wrong with me and I am desperate and I can't get myself out of it, so I need to be saved. And then verse 18 goes on to show me what I need to be saved from. And so Paul goes on and he says this, the wrath of God is being revealed. So the righteousness of God has been revealed because also the wrath of God has been revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of people who suppress the truth by their wickedness. And this is the bad news. The bad news is that all of humanity is in trouble because of sin. So the righteousness of God has been revealed as a way of rescue because the wrath of God has also come upon humanity. It's been revealed upon us. So you want the righteousness of God in his life? Absolutely, yes, but you also need the righteousness of God. You watch the Mission Impossible movies? Have you seen these movies? My family likes these movies. We watched all of the Mission Impossible movies, and they're based around the IMF, the Impossible Mission Force, right? And so they're about spies, secretive spies and kind of assassins that are the good guys that work to thwart the plots of evil dudes who are trying to take over the world and intercept governments and create instability in the world or spread diseases all over the world and things like that. And so the good guys, like they assume other people's personalities and they fly out of planes and they jump off of cliffs and they hang off the sides of buildings and they do lots of like super cool things to take out the other bad guys. But there's something interesting if you go back and you watch all of these movies about the good guys in the IMF, and this is it, that most of the good guys in the IMF were actually bad guys first. They started off as bad guys that were caught in what they were doing, and the IMF gave them an ultimatum. You can either join the side of the good guys and fight against the bad guys, or we're going to kill you or put you in prison for the rest of your life. Now, I like watching these movies, and I've told you before, I actually dream these kind of movies because I just have this, I just want to save people, like from burning fires, and I would love to be a spy. Like, that would have been cool if I was in college and you start to get recruited. You know, apparently I wasn't worthy of that because I never got a phone call, but like, don't you think that sometimes? I know some of you are like, no, I don't want that risk, but like, I would love that. Like, that seems so cool to be able to do that. But it especially would be cool if the alternative was death or prison for the rest of your life, right? And that's what Paul is saying to us here. Every human being has this incredible opportunity to come into the life of God, but you don't just want it, you need it, because the alternative for you is living under the wrath of God. You see that? And then we start to squirm a little bit because we got to talk about the wrath of God. What is this wrath of God thing? And nobody even really wants to consider God as being a wrathful God, right? God is being angry. We just want like nice grandpa God, like loving grandpa that kind of looks at what we do and is like, oh, Billy, you shouldn't have probably done that, but it's okay because I'm your grandpa. Like, that's the kind of God that we really want to have, right? So we have to ask some questions. What is the wrath of God? Do we understand the wrath of God the right way? And then secondly, why does it come? What is the wrath of God, and why does the wrath of God come, as Paul says it does here? So let's start with what is the wrath of God. The wrath of God is at least three things. The first thing we get about the wrath of God is that it is God's his righteous anger. In other words, God's anger and wrath is not like your and my anger and wrath, right? Have you ever had an emotional outburst? You probably have. And you say things like, oh, I kind of lost control of my emotions. I flew off the handle. It's the athlete that comes off the field and is upset, so he smashes his helmet, punches the bench, breaks his hand, misses the playoffs, right? It's that kind of thing when we think about our anger. And we have words that we assign to our anger that go along with it, words like malice, slander, rage, spite. And I got to tell you, God is not like that. God is not punching walls. God is never losing his temper. In fact, God doesn't lose anything, certainly not losing his temper or flying off the handle. Now, there is emotion in God. There is passion in God, but God is never out of control like we often are in our anger. Instead, because God is righteous, because he's the standard, because he's holy, because he is perfection, he must come against anything that is unrighteous. In 1 John 1, it says that God is light, and in him there is no darkness at all. There cannot be darkness or sin or the acceptance of sin or darkness in God. And so God purposefully and determinately opposes anything that is unrighteous. And that's the first thing that God's wrath is. It is God's righteous anger. Secondly, it's God's determined opposition to sin, his determined opposition to sin. Verse 18 says, the wrath of God is being revealed from heaven, and the next word is against. It is against. It is opposed to all the godlessness and wickedness of people who suppress the truth. So wrath for God is a determined opposition to godlessness, to injustice, to unrighteousness. But you notice a little bit of a nuance in the verse because it says this, that God is against evil, not foremost against people, because the verse says that God is against the godlessness and the wickedness of people. Now, if people have godlessness and wickedness in them, by implication, God is opposed to them. But really, the emphasis is upon God is opposed to the evil that people do and that is in them. So what is this godlessness and wickedness that God is opposed to? Well, godlessness is really anti-godness. It is acting against God. Godlessness has the idea of denying God or living like God doesn't exist or rebelling against God. This could be active or passive. So it could be the person that shakes their fist at God or gives God the middle finger. It's like, I hate you, God. I deny you. I don't want anything to do with you in my life. And it's an active rebellion purposefully and maybe even intellectually and volitionally against God. But godlessness could also be a passive thing where it's like, well, God, I don't have time for you. I ignore you. I don't worry about that. I'm not going to think about that. And maybe I take your name in vain and I'm disrespectful to you, but it's a very passive Midwestern kind of a way of treating God. That's godlessness either way. And then wickedness is anti-humanness. It is acting against the people that God has created in his image. And so this is where you hurt people and you exploit people and you use people or you steal from someone or you lie or you insult them. And these are the things that God is against: godlessness and wickedness, unrighteousness. God is against evil. He's against exploitation. He's against hurting others. Ultimately, God loves the people that he has created, and he desires that they would receive his righteousness, which is why Paul starts off this whole thing. He knows he's going to talk to us about the wrath of God, and he knows the wrath of God is a true reality we need to come to grips with. But you know what he did before he talked about the wrath of God? He says, first of all, the righteousness from God has been revealed for all people, and you need it because the wrath of God is coming upon everyone for our godlessness and unrighteousness. Maybe think about it this way. I mean, for God to just let everyone get away with being unrighteous forever would make him unrighteous. And it wouldn't be good for anyone. If you've ever been in a chaotic place before, think maybe like middle school boys event, a preschool classroom with 33-year-olds, a Southwest Airlines boarding queue, maybe, too. And if you could imagine being in any of those or whatever scenario of your choice that's chaotic, and in that scenario there are no rules, there is no authority, there is no directions for what anyone should do, and everybody can do whatever is right in their own eyes, what would that result in? Anarchy, chaos, death. It would be survival of the fittest is what it would be, right? The strong would prey on the weak. It certainly would not be a safe environment. And so in this world, unfettered, unaccountable godlessness and wickedness leads to destruction for everyone. We need a standard. We need righteousness. We need goodness in some way. Now, sometimes, very personally, actually all the time, very personally, I don't want that. I personally don't want justice and accountability for me. Right? Like say I'm driving on the road and I kind of going over the speed limit, or I run a red light and no turn on red, and I'm like, well, nobody's coming, I'm just gonna go. And then I see the lights and they pull me over. When the cop comes up to my car door, I wanna pass. I wanna be like, well, sorry, I was just in a hurry, I had to get home to my kids, or I'm a pastor, and I know I shouldn't be speeding, but like, not that I ever get pulled over, I'm saying, but just, hypothetically, if I did. And, I want to pass. Give me a warning, that's fine, but I don't really want accountability or justice for me. If I got justice, you know what justice would be? It would be me getting a ticket and paying a fine. That's what justice would be, so I don't want it. But if at my house, when my kids are playing outside in our yard and people are zooming down my street at 50 miles an hour, you better believe I want the cops to show up and to start giving out tickets like it's Halloween candy, right? Because I want justice for my family, because I want to live in a safe space, and because people are making me and my family unsafe. Do you see how that works? It works in all of us that way. We really want to pass for ourselves, but we want justice for everybody else because we want to live in a good place, and we want to live in a safe place. We need justice, in other words. We need God's determined opposition to evil. And as hard as the wrath of God can be sometimes to understand and to accept, and there are questions, and you probably have questions in your mind about the wrath of God. At the same time, do you really want a God that lets things go? Do we really want a God that lets things go? A God who doesn't uphold what is good? Do you really want to live in a world where there is no hope of real justice, of ultimate justice taking place for all the wrongs that have been done? And that leads to our final explanation of the wrath of God, it is thirdly God's judgment against sin. The wrath of God is God's judgment against sin. So let's read verse 18 carefully. It says this: the wrath of God is being revealed actively right now, and has been. It is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness. What Paul's painting a picture of here is God, in his sovereign righteousness above the earth as the creator of all things, looking down upon the earth, and when he sees this godlessness and wickedness, he is actively judging that wickedness and godlessness because he is God. Now, how does that judgment from God then, if the wrath of God is in part the judgment of God, how does that judgment of God come upon this godlessness and wickedness? At least three ways. And Paul talks about all of these in the book of Romans. The first way that he's going to point out is that there is coming an ultimate day of judgment. There will be a day that comes where everybody will be accountable before God for everything that's taken place. He says this in Romans chapter 2 and verse 5. So just look over. That might be on page 912 in those chair Bibles. So look there. Romans chapter 2, verse 5. He says this: because of your stubbornness and your unrepentant heart, you are, get this, you're storing up wrath against yourself for the day of God's wrath, the ultimate day of his wrath, when his righteous judgment will be revealed. God will repay each person according to what they have done. To those who by persistence in doing good seek glory and honor and immortality, he'll give eternal life. But for those who are self-seeking and who reject his truth and follow evil, there will be wrath and there will be anger. So look, there is coming this final day of judgment where everyone will be fully accountable before God. And that helps to explain a bit why we don't always see justice immediately in this life. Because doesn't that bother you sometimes? I'm a pastor, this bothers me. This is one of my questions. Why is the war in Ukraine still going on? Why is this thing in the Middle East still happening and taking place for all of these people who are being killed and murdered, and God hates murder? Why is that still going on? Why are there war crimes still happening and taking place? Why is there sex trafficking? Why is there people trafficking still going on in this world? I hate that, right? And don't you sometimes ask those questions like, why? And then personally, for the injustices you've faced in your life and in your family and in your circle, you're just like, why is this allowed? Why is this happening? And I don't have a full answer for why all that's happening, but I do know this, that there is an ultimate day of justice that is coming from the God who created this universe, and everyone will be accountable before God. In fact, Paul helps us a little bit later on in Romans in dealing with the injustices that we face in our life, and he will tell us this, he will tell us, when you face injustices in your life, don't take vengeance into your own hands. Don't take revenge upon people. But he says this, he says, leave room for the wrath of God. Leave room for the judgment of God. Leave room for the justice of God to take care of that and handle that. We're called to forgive in the midst of those circumstances, but to trust in and to rest in the fact that God will judge the world. He will take care of it. Romans 12:19. So first of all, God's judgment has in view this ultimate day of justice that God will bring upon every person. Secondly, some of God's judgment is being mediated right now through governing authorities. Romans chapter 13 and verse 5 is an interesting verse. Paul's going to go on and say this: they, the governing authorities, are God's agents of wrath. We have Romans 13:5 up there. Maybe, there we go. They are God's servants. The governing authorities are God's servants. They are agents of wrath to bring punishment upon the wrongdoer. And we get this general principle, right? That God has established authorities in our lives and in society and in the world to bring order, to bring accountability, to mediate those things, and generally to keep the world from self-destructing. Governments, judges, police officers, social services, even the IRS is a form of authority to help mediate things within our government. Now, this statement from Romans 13, it also helps us to understand something about God's wrath and what his wrath is like. Because remember, God's wrath is not like our wrath. It says here that governing agents, or governing authorities are, did you pick up on this? Agents of wrath. Sounds like a spy novel, doesn't it? Like, I don't read a lot of spy novels, but I read Daniel Silva. It sounds like Gabriel Allon, Agent of Wrath, right? Book number 7 or something like that. That's what it sounds like. Kind of an intense word here, that the governing authorities are agents of wrath. But let me ask you this. Do you think that when Paul uses this term for governing authorities being agents of wrath, that Paul intends that governing authorities would be vindictive, hardcore authorities that are just looking to punish their people and make them pay? Do you think that's what he means by agents of wrath? Or do you think he means that they are intended to uphold goodness and justice for the sake of all their people? I think the second one is what he intends here, which gives us a sense then of what God's wrath is like, mediated to governing authorities. It's a purposeful, controlled thing, but also coming very strongly against anything that is evil, to uphold goodness and justice. So God's judgment is going to come in a final day. God's judgment comes now in some way through governing authorities. And then thirdly, God's judgment is being revealed right now primarily by God giving people over to what they want. That's what Paul's going to say. God's judgment upon people is coming now primarily through God giving us over to what we want. Next week, we'll get a full rundown of this from the rest of chapter 1 and what this looks like. But just notice today that God's wrath and judgment right now in the lives of those that are godless and wicked is this, verse 24. Therefore God gave them over in the sinful desires of their hearts to sexual impurity. Verse 26, because of this God gave them over to shameful lusts. Verse 28, furthermore, just as they did not think it worthwhile to retain the knowledge of God, so God gave them over to a depraved mind. Judgment from God is God giving people over to sin, to lust, to a depraved mind. So there is coming a final day of judgment, but that judgment is seen right now, and God allowing people to experience what they want, which is life apart from God, right? God didn't make robots. He created us in his image, and he gave us some measure of free will, and so he will not force his way upon us. He will not force his righteousness on anybody. And so many people choose to say no to God. If people reject the knowledge of God, say, I want to do life on my own, God will not force them, and so they live life apart from him, and that is the judgment of God. Because that space they live in where they say no to God, it's not a neutral space. They don't just sort of stay in a neutral place where, oh, it's just going to be okay, I'll live life without God. What Paul describes is an ever-descending slide that's further and further away from him, further and further away from truth, further and further away from righteousness, further and further away from justice, further and further away from goodness, and into madness. It's moral and spiritual degeneration. It's decreation. It is the undoing. It's life without God. Do you know, one of the scariest things that you and I could ever experience is God giving us what we want. Can I say that again? One of the scariest things we could ever experience as human beings is God giving us what we want, if what we want is for him to leave us alone. That's the judgment of God. It's like having cancer and saying to your doctor, well, I don't want to hear that from you, and I don't want any kind of cure. And going to your life on your own. We know that doesn't turn out well. Paul calls all of this suppressing the truth. Look at verse 18. They are people full of godlessness and wickedness who suppress the truth by their wickedness. This gets us to our second question. Why does God's wrath come upon us? Why this judgment? Why is God giving people over? Why this downward slide that Paul describes? Why? Because we have suppressed the truth. We've suppressed the truth and chosen wickedness. We've said no to God and yes to me and yes to my way. Okay, well, how have we done this? How have people suppressed the truth? Verse 19. Since what may be known about God is plain to them because God has made it plain to them. Okay, how? How has God made it plain to them? Verse 20, for since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power, his divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. In other words, looking at creation, living in this vast, beautiful, intricately designed world, the scene points to the unseen. The physical points to the spiritual. Just like a work of art tells you something about an artist. Many of you are here, you like to listen to music, you like plays. Maybe there's paintings or drawings or sculptures that you really like. And each of those works of art tell you something about the artist. They don't tell you everything about the artist, right? You don't know all the intimate details, but you know an artist exists and that thing expresses something about them. You think about when you were a kid and you brought home works of art to your parents. Some of you have kids, you have grandkids right now. And they bring home stuff from Sunday school, or they bring stuff home from school. You know what my art projects told my parents when I would bring those home when I was in elementary school? They told my parents, Jeremy should do something else with his life, is what they told my parents. I was not very good at those things, right? They still said something about me, mainly I should do something else, but I have a couple of daughters and my wife that are very good. I mean, they're very good at, it's Valentine's box time. We still got one left in elementary school, and it's Valentine's box time, and it's like mom's time to shine. Like, she's good at these things, right? Like with the daughters, they do a project together, and it shows something about her creativity there, because creative things show something about the Creator. Creation shows us something about our Creator. Now, many of you that are here, you're followers of Jesus, you're Christians. It's part of the reason you're here, so you believe what Paul is saying here. And when you look at nature, when you look at creation, it does something in you. So when you look at something like this, you look at mountains, for instance, right? You could go to this place and look at that, and you could have a moment with God there because you know this is showing you something about God. Or you see a work of art like this, right? See these falls, and you're just like, wow, that is unbelievable, and that is amazing. You see something like this, you see stars at night, right? And you get out where it's completely dark, and you're like, wow, I didn't even know there was that many stars that were out there, because sometimes there's a lot of lights, and you might see shooting stars and mountains in the background. You see something like this. Wait a minute. Somebody from the city of Johnson put this in. Move on. All right, yeah, there you go. There's another one, right? And so you see something in nature, creation, and it just, in your heart, if you allow it to do what it's intended to do, you have a moment of worship. And you say, God, thank you for the beauty of all you created. God, you are powerful and you are vast and you must exist. And what Paul says here in Romans 1 is that every single human being gets to see these kinds of things in creation, which points them to God, so they don't have an excuse for not seeking him out. Now, Paul doesn't say that viewing creation is enough to save anybody. This is an important point to make here. In order to have a relationship with God, we need the gospel. We need the revelation of Jesus Christ, the revelation of the righteousness of God, which comes from Jesus' life, death, and resurrection on our behalf. We call that special revelation. God is special revelation from God who came to save us and bring us the righteousness of God. But creation, what we call general revelation, is available to all people everywhere and is enough to show us that God exists and that we owe him our lives. It's enough to say to an individual, that tug that's in your heart, the conscience that you have, the voice that is speaking to you, what you're seeing here should push you to seek out that truth. Where does that truth come from instead of suppressing the truth? This was C.S. Lewis's story. C.S. Lewis, author of numerous books, especially the famous Chronicles of Narnia, often quoted in messages here at NorthPoint, especially if one of our elders, Kent Kramer, is speaking. He loves Lewis. Well, as a young man, C.S. Lewis was actually an atheist. I mean, he was raised in the church, but he ended up rejecting that when he was young, went to college, and he became an atheist. He didn't want to have anything to do with God. Eventually, Lewis became a theist, meaning he became finally convinced that God exists, and it was later that he ended up actually trusting in Jesus Christ, the special revelation in the gospel of Jesus Christ. Well, what led him to this? How did he get to that place from atheist to follower of Jesus? Well, it was his search for truth instead of suppressing the truth. He describes in his biography, Surprised by Joy, about nature and literature and music, and especially what he called joy. Joy, a longing of the human heart that nothing in this world can ultimately satisfy, that drove him to God. All of that pushed him to find God, and then through some Christian friends and further study, he came to see and trust in Jesus Christ. For others that seek the truth instead of suppressing the truth, God provides a person, or he provides a church. He might even provide a dream or some kind of encounter with Jesus, because there is enough truth in creation to point people to God. And as Paul says here, we got to see it, there is enough truth to make us accountable for our unrighteousness, for denying God and living our own way. That's why the end of verse 20 says all people are without excuse, because God has given them a testimony. He's placed it in nature. He has placed it in their hearts. Now, I told you there was some bad news in Romans, and this is especially in the next couple of weeks, the bad news Sundays that we have to deal with, right? And so I'm guessing you're not like, hey, this is wonderful. I feel great. This is really good, really happy. But this is God's word to us. And while bad news is never fun, as we often say around here, the more important question is, but is it true? What's most important is it true? Because if it's bad news and you don't know it, you're in big trouble, right? But bad news that we know is true and we're aware of, there's maybe a way, there's maybe something we can do about that. Like say, for instance, you go to the dentist and you get your dental checkup and the dentist says, you have a problem, you've got a rotting tooth. You don't typically look at the dentist and be like, you are so mean. I can't believe you would speak to me that way. That is not nice. Give me better news. Because if the news is true, you need to hear the news even though it's hard so you can do something about it. If you ignore your dentist and you don't do anything about it, it might be like this guy that was in the room next to me the last time I went to the dentist a couple of weeks ago. This guy was screaming. And I don't just mean like, ow, oh, that hurts. He's like, and this is like continually during my whole dental checkup, right? He's just yelling. I'm like, that guy must have had a rotted tooth like a year ago and he ignored his dentist, right? And now he's got to pay the price for that. I don't know. It was not good. I was like, I don't want that procedure going on over there, right? My point is, with a slight digression, let's not ignore or avoid the hard truth. Even Paul and God giving us this truth is his grace to us. After all, let's turn this now and apply it. Paul is writing this to Christians. Think about that for a second. Paul is writing all of this to people who are followers of Jesus, which to me says he's not primarily trying to get a bunch of Christians to freak out about the decline and the destruction of the world and sit around and look at everybody else and say, look at those people. Look at what is happening to them. This world is so terrible. All those people are so terrible. The world's going to hell in a handbasket. Can you believe it? Yeah, we got to just get together with Christians and huddle up and stay away from all those bad people that are being destroyed. That's not the reason why Paul is writing this. So what do you think he is trying to tell us as he writes all of this to followers of Jesus? And I'm going to summarize it real quick for you. It's this. He's saying, we all need Jesus. That's what I'm telling you. Everyone needs Jesus. And in God's mercy, Jesus has come for us. The righteousness from God has been revealed for us, and you don't just want it, you need it. And God has brought it to us. Because after all, we're all human, aren't we? We all rebel against God. We all are selfish. We all have some level of godlessness and wickedness in us. We also sometimes suppress the truth and say no to God, and we hurt our fellow human beings. You probably did it this morning before you even came to church, right? Not to pick on you, but we all deserve the wrath of God for our unrighteousness, which is what makes Romans 1:16 and 17 so absolutely amazing. The righteousness from God has been revealed to us. It has been brought to us through Jesus. So when you see where we were without him, and you see how bad it was, that we deserve the wrath of God, then life in God looks so much more amazing. And coming to grips with what we've seen today can lead us to a place of humility and gratitude to God for all of his mercy, for sending Jesus, for making a way of salvation for us. And so instead of, look at how bad the world is, we say, look at how bad I was and how gracious God is to me. And then maybe we can go from that place of humility and gratitude, thanks to God for providing his righteousness for us through Jesus, and move to this place. God, help me to be eager and unashamed and helpful to others in coming to see your gospel. Because we do all need Jesus, which means my neighbors need Jesus, and my family needs Jesus, and my coworkers need Jesus, and my classmates need Jesus. For C.S. Lewis, it was a couple of friends in particular that brought him to faith in Jesus. a late night till like 3 a.m. conversation. One of those friends being a fairly famous person named J.R.R. Tolkien, who wrote The Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit novels. And this is how it often works. We come to trust in Jesus through the influence of friends, through invitations, through love, through words, through a presentation of look at what Jesus has done in my life, come into his life. So who's your friend? Who's your neighbor? Who's your classmate? There is a way for every single person to come into the life of God, and you might just be able to help them get there. Would you pray with me?